Good afternoon, everybody. So welcome to this afternoon's session. This morning's session was really about learning from each other in terms of what disciplines that were not your regular discipline, as in not medical oncology or radiation, were doing. And this afternoon's session is about learning from others. So these are individuals or groups that we have met over the past year at Cancer Trials Ireland, who we felt inspired by in terms of the work they were doing, and learning from those lessons to how we practice and how we develop clinical trials in Ireland in the coming years. So our first speaker is Sergi Villalta, who's joining us remotely, and he's talking about trialing, and this related to issues raised this morning about inter-hospital and inter-patient referral, and also if you were a patient, how do you find out who you should be referred to? So welcome very much, Sergi. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. The pleasure is mine. Can you hear me correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Then I will just share my screen. Can you please confirm that the screen is now on your screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Well, hello everyone. My name is Sergi. I'm part of the trialing team. We're a group of oncologists and medical specialists who decided to tackle one of the main challenges that we had in our clinical practice, which is easily finding suitable trials for our patients and referring them to the right centers. As oncologists, you'll know how time-consuming and even frustrating this can be. And that's why we developed this solution called trialing. Trialing is a free platform. It's designed to make the whole process easier and faster. And specifically, the platform allows you to do three things. First, you can find the most relevant trial for a patient in just seconds. Then you can easily contact the centers running those trials. And finally, you receive a response within 24 hours. Now, let me show you how it actually works, because once you see it in action, it's very easy to understand its value. So this is the web version of trialing. The phone app version, as you saw, also exists. And let's jump straight in. Let's do a live example. And I will go for a very specific case. Say I'm a thoracic oncologist and I'm searching for a trial for a patient. My patient has metastatic lung adenocarcinoma and they've progressed after first-line therapy. So we're now evaluating alternative treatment options. We've also performed an NGS panel and we've identified that they have a KRAS G12C mutation. So again, we have a very specific patient in mind. Let's see how the trialing app can help. All I have to do is choose on screen the correct option according to my patient's diagnosis. So first I would click on thoracic tumors. Here I would go to lung cancer. In this case, non-small cell lung cancer. As you can see, it's very simple. Metastatic, adenocarcinomas, and non-squamous. If I click here on biomarkers, I can see for each of these biomarkers, which trials are actually available. In our case, we click on KRAS and specifically G12C, and finally second line. So from all the trials, not only in Ireland, but also across Europe, these are the only 7 trials that our patient is potentially a candidate for. We make sure that by the end of this first process, you receive a shortened list of trials, so you can now go through this shorter list. And let me show you how that works. So now I can click on each of the trials and I have all the key information. Each of these trials has been reviewed by our medical team and they've created, for example, this little key data summary. We've also prepared for each of the treatment arms. Let's say I'm unfamiliar with this intervention. I can click here and this is all the key information of the intervention, as well as any associated publications, regulatory status, etc. And then you, of course, have the main description of the trial, inclusion, exclusion criteria, everything that you need to make an informed decision. And let's say I go through these trials and consider that this trial is the most suitable for my patients. What is perhaps the most exciting or interesting part about the app is that you can click here on view available sites. And not only for Ireland, but also for other countries in Europe, you can see which hospitals, which centers this trial is taking place. And let's say I want to refer my patient to Dublin, to Beaumont Hospital. All I have to do is click on refer. Here I can add the patient's clinical data, always non-confidential. So here I have just a quick example with background information and current disease, just to be quick. And then when I hit send, there we go. Now, the point of contact at the center, which is directly responsible for this trial, will receive a direct email, such as this one, that says you have a new request for a patient referral. In this case, Dr. Sergi Fayos from this hospital has a candidate patient for this clinical trial. These are the details of the oncologist. This is the medical record of the patient. And these are the contact details of Sergi so that you can please get in touch with them. So we've instantly established email communication between the oncologist and the trial point of contact. And if the center doesn't get back within 24 hours, we will follow up to ensure that the request is replied to as soon as possible. So we've gone from not knowing which trials are available for my patients to sharing the clinical data of my patients and contacting the most appropriate site in these 2 minutes. And that's the kind of efficiency that we built trialing for. I also want to mention that as the trialing team, we go a step further. So we have a dedicated group of physicians who are available for contacting to support every step of the way. And this also includes tracking every patient referral to ensure follow-through. Now, this is something that Cancer Trials Ireland they value very highly. And so we've started working with them to make trialing available in Ireland. And I'm very excited to announce that trialing is now fully available in the country. And in fact, I'm honored to share that Cancer Trials Ireland now actively recommends trialing as a primary platform for oncologists to search for clinical trials and make referrals. This is something we're very excited about, because by using trialing, we will be able to support you directly with any search and also once the referral has been made. Now, with all that said, I have one ask of you today, and it's that I'd like to invite you to please take out your phones. I'm putting this QR code on the screen, and I encourage you to scan it now. This will gain you access directly to trialing. You will be led to the app version where you can try it yourself and see just how simple it is. And the registration is very quick. We validate every user because we want to ensure that only medical specialists gain access. And so, in fact, if you scan this now, it will be very helpful for us because we will know that you will be coming from this session, and that's part of the validation process. So let me just end with saying that trialing is now already fully functional in Ireland, so you can start searching for trials today. And I'll leave the QR code on screen in case anyone is still scanning or registering. But in the meantime, I'd love to take any questions. Thank you all very much.
Your question, how did this come about? What was the catalyst for starting it?
Yes, so we're a small group based in Barcelona. This was the issue that we had day to day with the founding team. They're all oncologists, and we wanted to find a better way of finding the available treatments for our patients and also making the whole process a lot quicker. So since we couldn't find any tool out there, we created this ourselves. What was initially something only for lung cancer in Catalonia, the area around Barcelona, quickly became something that has been used across all of Spain. Over 90% of oncologists have the trialing app. And we've now made this available in other countries because we see that the challenge is the same across European countries.
Excellent. Any questions?
Where are they pulling the data from and how often does it get updated?
So I'm not sure if you heard the question, but the question is, where are you getting the data from and how often is it updated?
Perfect. Yes, thanks for repeating because I can't actually hear the audience. So we work directly with every single hospital. That's why we know the contact details for each of the trials. And so we speak with hospitals monthly to have any updates on trial openings and closures. With Ireland, in order to launch, we are working together with Cancer Trials Ireland and their contacts. So they have become the point of contact for us to make sure that everything is updated and we have the right referral points of contact.
Thank you. Sue. Wait, just 1 minute for the microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, if the trial is not available in Ireland and patient wants to travel to other European countries, will this app facilitate the referral as well?
So the first thing is you will see which countries in Europe and in the future in other areas as well. You will see where the trial is available. And therefore, the first part is speaking with the patient whether this is something that a travel that they can take part in. And there have been some cases where some trials offer support to the patients, financial and otherwise, accommodation, etc. And whenever that is the case, we announce it on the app with the trial so that you can make an informed decision.
Thank you. That was excellent. Thanks. We very much appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invite.
Our next speaker is Owen Cook, and who I hope is here. So Owen is involved in the TMRN and the clinical trials networks in Cork, and he is involved in social media advice for trainees. So we had heard him speak at another meeting, and we felt that it would be really beneficial in the current era of social media challenges and opportunities. So he's joining us by link.
Just to let you know, Owen's on video and
okay.
He won't be available for questioning as a result.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Owen Cook. I'm the Comms Officer for the National Clinical Trials Office, and I've been invited today to talk to you a little bit about social media as regards clinical research and clinical trials. So thank you very much indeed to Seamus and the whole team for facilitating, and apologies I couldn't be with you there in person today, but I will be leaving details at the end of my presentation for anybody to get in touch if you've got any questions or anything of that nature. So where to get started with social media? It can feel like a lot of noise. It can be a little bit overwhelming. You're not sure what to say. But the question you have to ask yourself, if you're running, we'll say, the social media for a particular trial or a grant or an organization, whatever the case may be, who are you trying to reach? Who's the audience is an absolutely crucial question you have to ask yourself. And to that end, what then is the best channel for that communication? And so we've found at the National Clinical Trials Office that for a professional audience, for a technical audience, LinkedIn can really be a fantastic resource. That's what we focus on these days. When it comes to something more, shall we say, PPI focused, more patient facing, perhaps some public engagement, you can try platforms like Instagram and Threads. Particularly Instagram can be very good if you've got a very visually appealing trial. Say for instance something that might be a great example, Infant down here in Cork do a great job of posting up beautiful pictures of babies, and that gets great engagement. But perhaps if you have something more technical to communicate, LinkedIn might be a better way to go. Now, of course, there's Blue Sky, which is rapidly growing, but early days yet on that. And of course, last but not by no means least, talk to your comms folks. You guys have Ken and Claire there, a fantastic pair. Genuinely talk to them. If you're thinking about social media, if you want a bit of advice, they're there for you. If you want to just run things by them, I know I love it when anybody gets in touch with me and asks me for just a little bit of general advice. So to that end, we've had a lot of success with LinkedIn, and I'd like to go through just some details of what we've been doing on LinkedIn and how it's worked for us, and hopefully some folks in the audience might be able to take some inspiration from that. And of course, as I say, if you have any questions at the end, I'll leave my details. So why do we choose LinkedIn? As I say, professional audience of interested folks. It aligns our mission with our audience very well. We want to be the storefront for clinical trials in Ireland, and that works very well on LinkedIn. We can present ourselves as such. Of course, you've got the X and Twitter sort of debacle that is kind of ongoing. You'll see that a lot of organizations are now leaving X and X/Twitter, whichever you would like to call it. I know most recently the European Clinical Infrastructure Network has announced that they're leaving. And So it's a sort of an unstable place at the moment with not a whole lot of content moderation, but can be good for echoing things that you're doing elsewhere. LinkedIn started off as a recruitment platform, and it does remain a recruitment platform. So what it can be quite useful for is if you're in an organization that is recruiting, is trying to get new people on staff, or if you're in a trial that's trying to say get a new RA or get a new CNM1 or whatever the case may be, you can then amplify that message very well on LinkedIn and tag folks that will amplify it for you, the likes of us at National Clinical Trials Office. So the other couple of factors, very high limit on your post size. So you can post, I believe it's something around 3,000 characters. It's not like Twitter where you've only got 120 or whatever the case may be. And you can tag as many folks as you like as a result of that down lower in the post, which is, we'll talk about a little later, is very, very useful. Last but not least, the articles feature we found very, very powerful. We've been leveraging this now for just over a year, and it's worked very well for us. And it helps as well because you can align your content strategy with it more easily. And I'll go over that now in these next couple of slides. So in terms of the process, when it came to producing content for LinkedIn and lessons learned, something that we learned is reuse and recycle. If you've got content already on your trial or in your organization that is already interesting, is already prepackaged, reuse it. Don't worry about being original. It's not about being original, it's about being disciplined and posting content on a regular basis and getting good content out there. But of course, there will be wells that you can dip into and find interesting content. Of course, talk to your comms officers about this kind of thing, your webmasters, people who've already posted this sort of stuff. Experiment to find out what works for you. For us, for instance, we were able to highlight each of our team members on LinkedIn, and that made for a great series of articles. We were able to highlight our various offerings, our feasibility program, our medtech program, so on and so forth. And we were able to do an article on each of those, thus allowing us to put something out weekly. Now, don't set a standard necessarily of weekly for your own trials and your own organizations. Perhaps something more along the lines, start off with monthly, and then if you find you've got a lot of content, bring it down to bi-weekly, every week then perhaps. But it can be grueling if you're obviously busy with other things. Last but not least, identify your allies. Identify your allies, people who will repost, who will help you, who will amplify your message. And after a time when you keep posting, you'll discover some of these folks are on there regularly, and you'll develop a good working relationship with them. Oh yes, of course, I mustn't forget, use faces where possible. Edit a face into your banner image if you can, especially with an article post, because it really helps with engagement. So I'll give you a little example next of some mistakes that we made when we were posting content to LinkedIn. Set up for success. Be sure to follow certain guidelines. I'm talking about things like image size, resolution. You'll find them on LinkedIn. Also, have a template. So whether you're using, if you're making an image for your LinkedIn post, make sure you have a template or a master file of sorts that you can modify. What we did was we had a banner image, and then we would have an image of one of our team members that we had brought the background out of and plonked it on there, and it really only took under 10 minutes after a while. Developing that little template was a little tricky to begin with, but just familiarize yourself with any piece of software that helps you make an image, be that Canva or even Microsoft Paint, or if you have the skills in, with say, Adobe Photoshop, it's a very powerful piece of software, but I understand that can be very intimidating for people to learn. So something along the lines of Canva can be a great tool, and you can have a free account, and you can just get to learn how to play around with images. It's not rocket science, honestly. Everyone in the room, I'm quite confident, would be able to manage putting together a banner image. Obviously, you have to be aware of some of your brand guidelines. So if you're using a logo, just run it by your comms or marketing officer, somebody who has a say in those kinds of things, who will know those brand guidelines, And just so you know, you're not using something egregiously wrong. 9 times out of 10, in fact 99 times out of 100 you won't be. But generally speaking, a good idea if you're using official logos to run these things by the parties involved. So as I said, templates and more templates. This was my Photoshop template. I know it might look a little bit intimidating to some, but it's really not hugely complicated at all. It's really quite simple. All we have there is an image of Michelle, our fantastic feasibility officer, a key milestone for success there in the banner. Very simple, really, and you can just export that very simply. And just every time there was a new article, I would pop in different text. We had our logo, I would pop in a different image, and that was that. So highly encourage you guys, if you're looking to make LinkedIn articles specifically, the resolution is 1280 by 720. That is sort of what fits nicely into LinkedIn. So yeah, try and aim for that if you can. If not, just play around and see what fits. And once you find the right size image, stick with it and then create a copy, try and use it again. So for us, what were the outcomes for LinkedIn? We posted an article a week for the bones of about a year. We got really strong engagement. We were really happy with it. We get weekly engagement on most of these articles. It was very slow and steady. We started off with about 150 to 200 followers, somewhere around that mark, and we're now at just under 2,500 followers. So slow and steady, but so long as we kept posting, we saw that engagement rise and rise. You can see here on the left, here's one of the articles that we put together. You can see right up the top line, we've got something a bit engaging with a couple of emojis. We've got a little bit of body to the text there, not too much, and then we've tagged everybody and anybody down at the bottom. Everybody and anybody, even if they didn't want to be tagged, we've tagged them. So a lot of those folks we have developed good working relationships with, and they will repost it to LinkedIn, and they can of course repost with thoughts, which also lets them sort of comment on the article, which can be very good. So yeah, great engagement on most of these things. We found that consistency is absolutely key, and of course slow and steady wins the race. When it comes to posting, regularity is key. That's really what the algorithm loves. So try and keep that in mind if you're posting for your organization or trial, that regularity is really absolutely crucial. So little graph here for you guys over the course of, that's about a year snapshot, 365 days, just a nice steady gradual increase over that year. We're just under the 2,500 mark now. Still a long ways to go. We're still going to keep growing. That is the plan. But we started off from almost no followers really, and we're getting there. So you guys can do this too. It's really not the hardest thing in the world. It's something that if you just dedicate a few hours a week to, and you get into a rhythm with it, you should be able to do for whatever trial or organization you've got the reins of the social media for. It's not really rocket science, because you genuinely will be able to grow your following. And while you're at it, growing your own LinkedIn profile is very helpful for your own career, because of course LinkedIn is, as I said, a recruitment platform. So once you get more familiar with it, you will be able to enhance your own profile. So if you would like to learn a little more about this, we will be running a LinkedIn training event online that anybody can join. Scan this QR code down here. Will take you straight to my email address, or indeed type in my email address. That's me there, ecook@ucc.ie. If you have any questions, do feel free to fire them my way. Of course, if you'd like to join the training, please let me know if you're interested. It's open to everybody. It will be specifically about creating articles for LinkedIn and content in general for LinkedIn, as we do think here at the National Clinical Trials Office that is the way forward, that things are going for professional communications. And once you start to learn how to produce content for LinkedIn, a lot of that content can be used elsewhere too, for things like your websites, your newsletters, etc., etc. The list goes on. Once you develop that skill set, and once you have that library of content that you can call on, it can be extraordinarily useful. And even if you move on to a different role, those skills will stand to you. So thank you very much indeed for listening to this little presentation. And once again, apologies I couldn't be there to chat with you guys and answer questions in person, but do feel free to drop me a message. Thanks very much, guys. Take care.
Thanks very much. He's starting a national survey of social media in doctors in training, led by Jessica Donoghue, one of the PST leads in Cork. So, watch the space. We would hope that it will be circulated probably sometime in February. And to get people's ideas on social media use, what platforms they use, how they find it helpful, what impacts it has on their professional lives. So the survey is being developed at the moment with leads in oncology, radiotherapy, hematology, and obstetrics. We would welcome your insights. So when it reaches your inbox, please, it's designed to take about 5 to 10 minutes to fill in total. So our next speaker is our keynote speaker, and we're delighted to welcome Mr. Alan Sharp, who is manager, CEO of the Marker Hospital, which have opened a start phase 1 unit late last year. Alan has now joined the Bon Secours group, and we were very impressed with how supportive he was to Austin Duffy and the team in developing the unit. And we've invited him here to get his insights from about research from a managerial point of view and how it could be facilitated at hospital level. So thank you very much, Alan. You're very welcome to join us, and we appreciate you being here today.
Thank you very much. So I just I've put a couple of slides up together, but most of what I'm going to say is I'm just going to talk through it. There are, with anyone who's involved in research in this country, there are a lot of differences. And my slides are perfectly sorry. And technophobic here. So just from myself, I'm currently the Group CEO of Bon Secours Hospital. But most of my conversation is going to be around what we did in the Mater Hospital to try and encourage and support clinical research. In the Mater Hospital, as most people would know, for any insight into, is one of the cancer centres in the country. It's got approximately 4,000 staff. It operates off about 540 million in revenue. And what it has seen since 2019 is approximately about a doubling in patients who need to be admitted for cancer and significant increases we're seeing in outpatients, etc. We're always supposed to put a quote up, so you can read that one and follow form. But it is true. If you're doing research and publications and stuff that's very nuanced from what we already know, you're wasting your time, to be quite honest. And when we recruit a lot of the consultants, and we were recruiting quite a significant amount, what we found in a lot of research was that a lot of research we were seeing was research that had, in a large part, been done before, and there were publications that were extraordinary slight nuances. Now, not huge percentage, but enough to be concerned. So the research, and what really catches our eye with young doctors and young consultants when they come, is that research delves into a space that nobody else has really looked at, or is looking for a breakthrough that can translate back down onto the floor where the patient will find that benefit very quickly. And there's a huge amount of that being done, and it's being done at a great level. I'm not going to go through this, everybody knows this, but predominantly the Mater Hospital would have done a lot of phase 3 and phase 4, and with the early phase cancer trials unit, we're now moving into phase 1. And the reason we're doing that is when you see the meeting, you see some of some people from our country having to get on a plane and go to a different country. There was a question asked a moment ago about what happens if there's a trial not here. Well, the belief is if you don't have any early phase cancer trials units, then you're unlikely to have some of these trials here. So the development of the early cancer phase trials unit came out of what we've seen was a lack from a national perspective of having a unit that could get drugs about 8 years earlier than we normally would get them, and that we could give those small number of patients who are involved in those trials an opportunity, and then it would actually create a pipeline for the other phases on the drugs at a much earlier stage and allow us to be involved at the high end of the research in those drugs. This is, Peter will talk about this, it's up here, this is Peter's unit, and that's just the information that we do from our clinical trials unit in the Mater. And then the unit that we started was START. And In 2000, there's always a personal piece for most people who try to do something that hasn't been done and you're trying to get some success, because there's a lot of brick walls you have to bang your head off to actually get something to move forward. And in order to do that, you're constantly, there has to be a motivation that sits behind it. I sat in a chair in a hospital in 2007 and I was handed a leaflet from my father which said, we have a trial, it will wrap around the cancer and it'll leave you where you currently are. I think the survival rate was for lung cancer was 5 years survival rate was about 5% at the time. He died 6 weeks later. But it was a leaflet. There was no real explanation given what was in the leaflet. There was no counselling provided. There was no consultation. And forward on about 18 years later, we're in a very different space. We understand the value of the counselling required, especially if patients dealing with cancer. We understand the need to actually impart the information in a more scientific way to the patients so that they understand it and in a human way so they can take on board what the clinical trial could possibly do for them. But also to understand that if the cancer that they're dealing with is genetic, that they can actually link, they can do something for the next generation that may actually benefit from their contribution to a trial. Why we do it, I pulled this from John Hopkins, but whether it's the person who's going for the trial or it's the business, it's pretty much the same. You know, if you want to be successful in health, you have to put the patient at the center of every decision you make. So you're doing trial work to try and find cures for your patients, to get better outcomes, to improve survival rates. You do it personally because generally most people are touched by some of these things. 1 in 2 people get cancer. It's what we hear constantly. We know when we look to our families. That means people in the same room when we sit for dinner. On average, somebody's going to get it. You're lucky if it doesn't come into your home. So there's a personal connection into normally trying to drive it forward. And the piece that kind of gives the biggest difficulty in this country around research is finance. We have great clinicians and we have great young medical trainees coming up who do great papers. That's here. We have them. We have people who trained in the Mayo Clinic and in all of the clinics around the world that are known for providing some of the best doctors in the world for cancer. But the biggest issue is money. So in the 5 years I was CEO of the Mater Hospital, we secured approximately I spent approximately 2 billion on the provision of healthcare. I had just asked Peter to remind me how much we actually got from the health system for research. And I think everybody in this room will have more money in your pocket here. And even those of you who don't have any money in your pocket, you have more money than I got. It was zero. No money in a health system that spends 2 billion in one location to provide care. Though you look at every piece of research that tells you without high quality clinical trials, you're not going to have high quality here, or it will not help you to be as good as you can be if you have it. So it's absolutely essential to driving your health system forward. You know, the why we do it, I just listed a few for the patients. But the reality is when you're not, I'm an engineer and an accountant by background. I'm not a clinician and love what the clinicians can do. I'm fascinated by it. But in all the literature, it leaves out one word for a patient, provides a patient with some hope. You go onto a clinical trial, you have a hope of trying to survive longer. And I just want to kind of, before I get into the difficulties of actually getting research into large academic hospitals and healthcare, I just want to give you one patient who when we were dealing with this patient, 38-year-old gentleman from Galway, who was faced with palliative care and faced with the survival of expected to be 4 weeks. We're 2.5, I'll give you the end before I go through the middle. 2.5 years later, this man is at home with his family. He's still alive. And it wasn't because of the clinical trials, but what will keep him alive is the clinical trials for the drugs that are able to deal with him after what they had to do, this gentleman. And his whole goal was to survive for his kids. And the surgeons did what they can do. And the reason I'm bringing it up as a surgical one, because we can see in other modalities that drugs have now removed the need to do surgery. This gentleman, to survive, had his urinary system removed, his bowels removed, his anus removed. He had drilled into his spine, drilled into his hip. He had parts of most organs, and then he had the HIPEC procedure, which is pump and warm chemotherapy drill. And his survival for the future is entirely dependent on clinical trials to find drugs that will keep him alive. And that's why, we do this, and that's why we try to invest. When we said startup, we were very lucky. We found partners within the health system who had access to capital, who supported us. But the start journey was born from one of these pieces here, which is the network and relationship. So the fellowship schemes that we do internationally are hugely important. They create those networks, they create those relationships, they create an opportunity to learn what's happening in other countries, and you get an opportunity to bring it back. But you don't just bring back the knowledge, you bring back the relationship. Start in Ireland is here simply because of the relationship between one man and the parties who are doing this, which is Austin Duffy. And he came back, and we got that company to eventually invest a significant amount of money to the building of the START unit. They've also paying for the whole operating cost of the unit, and there's no expense to the patient. They're getting a benefit by collecting information on the drugs and the trials, etc. But it brings a new discipline into the country in quite a significant way. And when I talk about these are the pieces that I use when we're trying to push a change or we're trying to grow. The culture, you cannot move something forward unless the foundation is right. The culture is your foundation. And for us, when we're dealing with health, and it's no different in the current environment that I'm in now versus the matter when I was there. If the patient is central to every decision, you will make the right decisions and you'll make good decisions, and you'll focus on what can help the patient. That starts with how you help the masses, and then it goes down to the smaller groupings of people. And that's where the clinical trials comes in, where you have to be able to operate in each of those sections to be able to give back to your community. And the culture drives that. It's a patient-focused culture. Leadership, and you'll hear from one of the best in Peter later on today, you have to have leaders in the research space who have energy, who have vision, who have drive, and who are trying to push research in the institution despite the huge pressures that are in the institutions to deliver health. There's not a single KPI that I faced that related back to research. KPIs, you'll see them in the news. How many trolleys do we have in a hospital? How many patients are on the waiting list? That's about the extent you're hearing in the news. There are hundreds of other KPIs that are added in there. But research, which impacts positively on driving quality improvements in the hospital, drives outcomes for patients. It does all those really good things. It's not mentioned. It's not in a KPI. It's not there. So you need leadership who actually see beyond what the system is looking for and looks at what the system needs in the future and how best to position it. The networks and relationships, I've just discussed that. That's a lifelong piece that every one of you then are training to be doctors to make sure you manage and you care for, because these are the relationships that will help you get your patient into a trial. It will help you know about a trial. It will help you link to other parties who may help you fund the trial. The environment within the hospitals, one of the things we did in the Mater Hospital was we figured out ways of an environment. I'm talking about multiple environments. It's a built environment, because I'm a firm believer that if you build something, it becomes a home and people can point to it. So the early phase cancer trials, will actually be pointed to by every institution in the country when they need or have a patient who fits a trial. So you now have a home, and that home now drives an interest, and the interest then also drives an ability to recruit staff. So you now are into the level of being able to recruit some of the best people in the field, because they see there's an area where they can practice the research part of their profession in addition to the clinical side, the patient side of it. And most consultants like to mix it up. They like to have a piece of research, and they also like to be on front of patients as well. They like both sides of the equation. So you get to attract some of the best people in the world by having some of the best research facilities in the world. But if you're fragmented and everybody's doing something in a little corner of a space, then that doesn't happen. You don't really have something of substance to be able to support. You have lots of publications. You might have lots of little trials. You'll have lots of patients who are benefiting from it. Now, we have a fairly big trial unit, and I'm always reminded that it's the biggest in the country that was in the matter. And that has a home. It has a large space where everybody knows where it is and they know what happens in it. Again, that's predominantly driven by the academic partnership who will put the money up. So the money even for that unit came from outside of health. It came from education. So the message I'm giving is that the health component of this is actually not at the scale it needs to be. Then you go inside that built environment. There's also the secondary environment. You need to create a very much an innovative, it's part of the next one, an innovative environment where you're looking at new technology, you're looking at AI, you're looking at developing devices, you have people working all these spaces. And it's not that they will individually contribute to anything around clinical trials, but they're actually feeding into the culture of innovation, the culture of research, and they're all feeding off each other. And it creates that need to try and get a greater understanding of the things that we don't fully understand, or find better solutions to the things that we're unable to do. And the biggest topic, investment. What's stopping us from being able to compete on the world stage in research? It's investment. And, we have a new consultant contract. It's the first time we've seen anything of any significance go into it around research or education for our consultants. But it's a massive missed opportunity. It gives money to individuals who will use it well as individuals. But when you have an institution with 324 consultants, that equates to about 6.5 million that could potentially go into in education research. If you bundle that together and then focused on what are your key research areas you want to focus on, you can drive better value, you can drive better better quality in them, drive more interest, and you can attract people who are some of the best in the world. So how it's not always about what we spend, it's sometimes about how we spend it. And at the moment there is, in my view, a real lost opportunity even in the contracts. And it's not that I would suggest we take anything from the clinical fraternity in this case. It's the fact that they should have a research board in a hospital to be able to drive this money, that it's red circle that never gets spent anywhere else other than research. So by doing things we know individually, it's more costly. You lose opportunity. If you do things at scale, you get to do more. And really that's what we want to do in research. The more research you do, the more opportunities you have to find. And so that's predominantly where I've come from. And in the hospital now, I'd be fairly comfortable in saying that I think the matter's trajectory now is one and that's completely open because of the investment and how they've invested. And even the clinician, the clinical body there is now trying to figure out how they can collectively work together with the fundings that they have, because they're limited. They can only accrue 4 or 5 of the budgets. I think it's the current rule. And they're trying to figure out how do we actually pool more? How do we get this to work better? And it's not that they're trying to detract from it, just wanting to use it better so they can actually help grow research. But the biggest issue in growing research in this country is actually getting the investment. And it at times, and this is the final statement I make, it hits the academic and health worlds at each other. Because all of the research happens with the need of patients, patient data, patient information. Generally, patient hospital diagnostic systems, we're using all of the infrastructure of healthcare. None of the money comes that way. It all comes through the academic side. And the academic side does a great job in actually securing that money to try and get it into research. But in order, I think, for it to work better in the future, it needs to have a way to actually join both of those together and actually create some KPIs for the country that actually puts us at the forefront of how we move clinical trials forward. And the consultants who set up the clinical trials unit will tell you 5 years ago, he would be at exhibitions with the pharmaceutical companies, literally having to beg for money to try and run clinical trials that he knew would benefit people into the future. And that's what we want to move away from. He's made an enormous step in moving away. The investment I think we made totally in START without the operating investment is about 8 to 10 million. And in the scheme of things, when you're running a business over 5 years that spends 2 billion, you would feel that that's reasonable. I come from the tech background, and in one of the tech companies I work at, their investment to make inkjet cartridges and PCs and all the stuff, we throw in a skimp 2 years after we consume it. Especially this generation, we've consumed technologies that nobody else is consuming it. They spend $2 billion a year to research disposable products. We spend nothing. That's my closing statement. We spend nothing. That's what needs to improve.
Thank you very much, Alan. Very much appreciate what you've done in the matter and the legacy you've left there. It's tremendous. I think that there were over 70 referrals to the START unit in the matter in the first week that it opened, which if you were looking for, was there an unmet need, I think that statement says it all. Are there any questions from anybody? Rasheen.
That was a really wonderful presentation, very clear, and I think the message is really good that you're sharing with us. I'm one of the medical oncologists in Cork, and we've referred a number of patients up to START already. I wonder, could you comment on the plans or the model for recruiting investigators to work in START, and how that fits with the new contract? How do you see that working as you move forward? Because it's really, as you said, it's a unique situation for us in Ireland, whereby we have that type of facility on a public site.
I think the starting point is that it will be, from START are fully funding this. So the model we started with, bear in mind, this has got no state funding in it. We had to try and figure out how we could use the current contracts to do it, whilst maintain indemnity for the consultants, whilst maintaining their access to a pension. And we had to go outside to talk to a state claims agency, to talk to the pension side as well. And once we're caring for public patients in a public setting, which is why START is embedded in the middle of a public hospital, and it's why it's run by a public consultant. So the recruitment process for investigators, I think, Austin will be open to almost any model that allows him to move his vision forward, and he will work with it. But I think the key one being is that it's about how do we actually get time for those investigators to come into the hospital and spend time. That model hasn't been fleshed out beyond the Matters clinical teams, which the goal is that where we have consultants who have an interest in doing investigations, that we actually work around temporary splits in contracts, and then we backfill from money that's paid to us from the clinic, what's paid from the clinical trials. That's the core goal at the moment in the early stages. That's going to have to get a lot more sophisticated as it branches out into a national system. But at the moment, they need to start moving from a concept to something that's actually delivering the trials. And once they're in that trial delivery phase, I think once the output is very positive and they can demonstrate that, then it's a case of how do they actually look at the wider pool of investigators to pull them in close to it. And that will require a more complex conversation, either with those institutions, but the Matter's great at doing is doing split contracts and saying, okay, if we need an investigator that's in another hospital that has a particular specialty, and we've done it, they did it in pathology and some of the other areas where we were trying to bring back world-class leaders, and we split contracts with other hospitals. So you split contracts with other hospitals, you've joint appointments where they'll do their clinical work in one hospital and do their research here. The academic side has also been helping out by providing money to allow for additional recruitment so that you can go out to other parties and split contracts. So At the moment, it's very unstructured, but there are mechanisms to help. Is it the final solution? Absolutely not. It needs to become a lot more sophisticated than it currently is.
Angela?
Thanks, Alan. I wonder, could you perhaps speak to the different challenges faced between the voluntary hospitals and the HSE hospitals? Because I think, while the voluntary hospitals, to a large extent, they have more autonomy over their budget.
You'd have to turn the camera off.
Turn the camera off.
I don't think there's enough solicitors to protect me from the defamation.
And it is very different. We're all aware it's very different. But I'm wondering, could you perhaps, in public, speak about the learnings that maybe the HSE could take from the voluntary hospitals who have, for various reasons, largely benefited more from drug savings, and therefore they really tend to protect and support research. But what learnings can the HSE hospitals take from the voluntary path?
The starting point is, in order to learn, you have to want to learn. Everybody's here voluntarily because you want to expand your knowledge, you want to improve yourself, you want to be able to do what you want to do. So the starting point is you have to read the Catherine Day report and acknowledge and accept that the voluntary hospitals are a valuable part of the health system that can contribute. Second thing is, if you don't want to read the report, look at the national services and where they're all provided from. The Mater Hospital has the broadest spectrum of national services in the country, of any hospital. But then when you look at other voluntary hospitals, and there's also independents, bear in mind we have James's, Beaumont and Tala are called independents. So technically they're not owned by the HSE, they're funded, they're under a share arrangement. I think it's back to the minister. So they report to the minister instead of the HSE. It's a difference, but it's an important difference because they have boards who don't have to take instruction from the HSE. They can, if they have a concern, go back to the minister. The part being is that about 95% of the healthcare in Dublin has been provided by independents and voluntaries. And the reality is that the voluntaries have a budget, but they also have a board. And if you're running any business of any scale, having a board, a single board running a large business is fantastic. It's what you're supposed to have. But what the voluntaries actually get the benefit of is the layers between the decision makers and the governance is so short, so narrow, that movement happens really quickly up and down. Decisions get made quite quickly. COVID and the cyber attack demonstrated how agile the voluntaries can be because they don't have the same rule book. They can actually make decisions and stand over certain decisions and just move with them. The difficulty being is that they are fully funded or significantly funded by the state, and you then have the concern of control. And if the control side of your business is your only goal, then you squeeze out the agility, the innovation, all of those good things that make the voluntaries unique because they've had that. We wouldn't have heart-lung transplant in the country. We wouldn't have a national spinal unit. We wouldn't have ECMO. We wouldn't have many other services other from the fact that the voluntary hospitals went out. They steered their young clinicians to do their fellowships in very specific places. It's because they knew they needed those skill sets to come back and they needed those programs to grow. There's a lot of things that they do extremely well, but they do it very quietly. And it's not even done by the management, it's done by the consultant body who put a hand on the shoulder of a young, talented, upcoming clinician and will say, your skill set lies here, you really need to go for a fellowship in this location, and can you bring back the knowledge that will provide us so we can then expand the service in that area. So they're the things that they need to do, but you really have to want to learn. And that's the real message. If you want to learn the benefit, then you can actually go in and take a huge amount from all the volunteers. And we learn from each other as well. Like I would have picked up the phone to Mary Day and James's, I would have picked it up to Michael in Vincent's, you would pick it up to colleagues elsewhere. So there's never a fear amongst the voluntaries of reaching out to each other and say, how are you doing something? How is it different for you than us? Or can you help us? So it is a cultural thing. And it's generally born out of whatever is your key priority. in your business. And if the key priority starts with the patient, then everything else should follow suit. And that includes learning. If you want your patient to have the best experience and the best outcome, then you have to learn what's the best way to deal with that patient. And that goes for everybody. It goes for the voluntaries as well as the HSE. It's not a one-way street, it's both directions. Okay.
That's a great way to finish. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. I was really impressed with your speech in the matter and how well you were regarded there. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is the second speaker joining us from Barcelona this afternoon. So Dr. Federica Turrisi, I hope I haven't said that being correct, is joining us from Barcelona, where she works for MEDSIR, which is a clinical trials organisation founded by Javier Cortez, who many of you will be familiar with in the field of antibody-drug conjugates and clinical trials in breast cancer. So they've been visiting units in Beaumont and James's yesterday. So we've been able to learn from them, and they've been able to learn potentially from us. And so we very much look forward to your talk this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Federica Turrisi. You can tell from my name and from my accent that I'm Italian, and I work in the Strategic Clinical Development Department at MEDSIR. As the previous introduction, our company is a private company which was founded by Dr. Antonio Llombar and Dr. Javier Cortez and our CEO, Maria Campos, 13 years ago. We're very lucky because, our headquarters are in sunny Barcelona in Spain, but we also have subsidiary in New Jersey. Our main aim is to deliver, design, look for the fundings, and run investigator-initiated trials, thanks to a large group of highly specialized multidisciplinary professionals that work in every steps of this process. This is a slide I always like to share because I think that maybe helps you a little bit locate better where MEDSIR is in the landscape of clinical trials in general. We can be seen in the middle, so connecting pharmaceutical and biotech companies, which is where we take the money for the clinical trials, and wide and international operative network, including CROs, because we can act as a CRO in Spain, but outside of Spain, we subcontract other CROs or operative networks, depending on the countries. And the main part, which are oncologists and key opinion leaders. I want to highlight that between MEDSIR and the oncologist is just a collaboration that's completely free of cost for the oncologist, and it's a scientific collaboration. In fact, the scientific property of the whole trial and during the whole process will be, intellectual property will be of the oncologist. So we had 13 years of life. We developed more than 60 studies during these 13 years, and we enrolled more than 2,000 patients along 187 hospitals. The idea from our trials came from more than 130 oncologists, and our network can count on more than 400 oncologists all over the world. We secured more than 160 million euros for our trials from pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, more or less 35, I think it's a little bit more. And we delivered 81 presentations in international and high-impact conferences. So this is another map with few numbers. As you can see, our network is very well established in Europe, with larger one being in Spain, because we started in Spain. We are a Spanish company, but also we crossed the borders and went to Brazil, where there are main partners, which is the Oncoclínicas Group, based in Brazil. And also you can see Northern America, Central America, and actually we started also expanding the network in China recently for some of our biggest trials, which needed a diverse population, and so we started this collaboration with China at the moment. A few numbers, as I told you already, more than 130 oncologists working actively on idea with us, and a network that is very wide of 400 or more oncologists. We started as a breast company because our founders were breast oncologists, but recently we also expanded in all the other indications, so we can count trials in all different indications with lung being the second main indication, but also I'll explain a little bit later better. We also have few trials in brain metastases and brain tumors. This is the same slide. So, as I said before, we offer a support through the whole process of developing and running investigator-initiated trials. And during this whole process, the oncologist is the central part. That means they will be aware of every single steps and be in contact with all the teams in our company. We're very approachable, very rapid also, and quick in answers. So it's a very flexible and continuous conversation with the PI. Very first steps, that means that we start in the very first 2 steps, which is where my team work. And we start the collaboration with signing an NDA, and the oncologist shares the idea with us. This sharing the idea is very flexible as well. Sometimes we work with oncologists that they just know the population, maybe the type of drug that they want to use, and the endpoints, but we can work on that together, or they come to us with already well-developed synopsis, and also an idea of which is the pharmaceutical company or the biotech they want to present the trial to. In these first 2 steps, I think a great asset of MEDSIR is the strategic point of view that we can give it to you, because we have different contacts with pharmaceutical companies, and we make a research also of the different areas of interest, not only the already published one, but also we can, sometimes we have contacts before, and we can work on presenting your trial at the right point to the right pharmaceutical companies with the right timings, as well as studying different pipelines that you might be not very familiar with, and we propose new molecules depending also on the results published at recent conferences and congresses. So it's a very interesting point, I think, the very first steps. After that, we develop the synopsis and we present it to pharmaceutical companies, and hopefully they show interest, and we started developing the budget. This can take up to a year because we start also the negotiation with the pharmaceutical companies. It's all on us because every single step is, there is a team in charge of every single of these steps. And we also write the protocol, and of course, with your help and with your support and with your feedbacks and so on. After that, hopefully, we negotiate the budget, everything is good, and we start the trial. Here we have 2 other members of MEDSIR, Merichel and Carolina from the startup unit. And in this part too, you are central, because the oncologist will help us also in finding the right site for your trial. That means we also go to the sites themselves to see and to make all the process as specific and as personalized as possible. We run the trial, as I told you before, in Spain. We can act as CRO, but outside of Spain, we subcontract vendors and CROs or operational network, depending on the country. And then eventually we publish the study, and we take care also of presentation at congresses and publishing the results, and also eventually giving new life to your trial. That means that depending on the data and your idea, if you want to give other option to your trial, we'll try to look for more fundings linked to the trial that we developed together. Apart from ISTs, we recently started also with other scientific activities. I want to mention the preceptorships and the mentoring activity, which are called mainly think tank meetings and general research preceptorship activity. In the think tank meeting, it's a very interesting dynamic, because we also develop an investigator-initiated trial, but it's a panel of mentors. The mentors younger oncologists, oncologists in training or raising stars, and help them through the development of investigator-initiated trials. And they're usually sponsored by a pharmaceutical company, which give us the pipeline, and the ideas are developed with their pipeline. Recently, we did one in breast and one in lung, sponsored by Daiichi and AstraZeneca. Then we have brainstorming session, which are another interesting dynamic, where we bring together oncologists from the same indication from all over Europe. Usually they're in Barcelona. We're going to do one in lung next week. And we propose a pipeline of molecule, maybe from biotechs or for smaller companies. And of course, in these cases too, we develop together and we help you we support you in the development of investigator-initiated trials. And then we have the MedTalk, which are a scientific symposium. We did recently one, ISMO 2024, with brain metastasis as a topic. These are a few of our trials, maybe are the main ones. Some of them can ring a bell. Maybe our most famous one is the FERGAIN trial, which was in early breast cancer, HER2-positive patients. It was an adaptive trial, PET. It was like a de-escalation of chemotherapy in early breast cancer, HER2-positive, with 377 patients with adaptive design. And then we have the ADELA trial, which is our first phase 3 trial in collaboration with Menarini. And then in the thoracic space, we have the Looper and the Peccati. Recently presented them at ESMO 2023, the Looper, and 2024, the Peccati in thymoma and small cell lung cancer. And then let me just explain better the last one, which is the Tuxedo 3 trial, because it's an interesting story, I think one of our most successful story, and also that show you a little bit better how we work and how we can support you somehow. So the Tuxedo 3 trial is a trial that was born thanks to a collaboration with the University of Vienna and thanks to a collaboration with Professor Matthias Perser. Professor Matthias Perser came to us because he was working on a trial, very small trial, monocentric, but was the first trial with trastuzumab deruxtecan in patient with active brain metastases. He wanted to make his trial bigger, with expanding also like multicentric, expanding the cohort, expanding also the number of patients. And we were actually working on a similar trial, which was the DEBRA trial. The DEBRA trial was a multi-cohort trial with a similar population and also the same drug with trastuzumab deruxtecan. And together we developed the Tuxedo 3 trial, which was an international multi-cohort trial. I'll have the design after, but basically we're metastatic breast cancer patients, advanced non-small cell lung cancer patients, and patients with solid tumors and leptomeningeal disease. And it was a very successful story because after that, as you can see, we started running a series of trials, all with patients with brain metastases, also thanks to the fact that it was a very uncovered population with few options. So the recruitment of patients, I'll show you in the next slide too, was incredible for the Tuxedo 3 trial. And this is an example of how we can help reaching more patients thanks to the collaboration also between our shared view and the view of the oncologists that not only for making trials bigger, but also to develop new ideas. As you can see, we changed it, the sponsor is the same, but we changed it, the ADC that was in the trial. And then also the REPOSE trial, which is the last one that we developed, is with repotrectinib, sponsored by BMS, in patient with non-small cell lung cancer and ROS1 mutation and active brain mets. This collaboration is also to a collaboration with Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and we recently published a pooled analysis of all these trials with patients with active brain mets. And of course, you can see also here a few names of other collaborators that took part into the trial. This is the design, as I told you, 3 cohorts, and with primary endpoints being intracranial response rate in the first 2 cohorts and 3 months overall survival rate in the 3rd cohort. And these are the recruitment data. As you can see, the expected one is the yellow line, and there was aroused an incredible excitement in the scientific community, of course, giving patients incredible possibilities. We don't have the results because they will be published and presented probably at ASCO 2025. So stay tuned just in case. And, I think something happened it's fine. So last but not least, I wanted to show you a little bit how, you may have understood already what's the possibility of collaboration between us, Cancer Trial Ireland, ISMO, and all the oncologists of the incredible network that you have here in Ireland. Cancer Trial Ireland is a well-established network and with almost 30 years of experience in running clinical trials and the operational capacity and expertise. I can count on an incredible network of young oncologists, more experienced oncologists, and hospitals all over. A small country, but from what we saw, with an incredible, I saw the presentation this morning were amazing as well. So with an incredible potential. And on the other side, MEDSIR as a network which is expanded in Europe, and as you can see, more or less all over the world. And we also have the experience in giving the strategic point of view, finding the molecule for the trials, and helping you in investigating trials, but also to look for the fundings and to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies, and of course give more possibilities for the trial to be funded and accepted. And of course, together, these two very established expertise can give, increases the possibility to look to reach fundings, but also to give possibility to the patients. As you saw in the Tuxedo trial, we reached a very specific population, and now we're giving even every time we try to look for more possibilities for, in this case, that population, but that happened also in other contexts. So yeah, that's it. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. I don't know why my email is like that now, but I can give it to you after all. So yeah, and then, I will be happy to answer now or later on. Thank you very much.
It's very impressive what you've achieved in terms of the, not just in Spain, but the synergies with other countries with the Tuxedo portfolio. That's very impressive and a huge unmet need for us here. So one of the things would be, which can often be challenging in our job, is interacting with pharma and getting engagement in terms of projects and funding for studies. You may have an idea, but then it doesn't work out. So what advice would you give to people starting IITs here?
It's hard sometimes to understand that the clinical, the site, I would say that the academic need sometimes is very frustrating, but we had experiences where the academic idea was incredible, and then when you go to pharmaceutical companies, there is another, they're looking for something else, or, maybe it would be too expensive for something they're looking for at that point. But the important thing is trying to understand that you can fit into what they're looking for, but also giving them the clinical need that you're looking for in your hospital. So I think it's a match of these two things, trying to push in the academic research, because it's what we're trying to do, is like to give other possibilities rather than the bigger trials that you all know, and they're all running in the pharmaceutical companies.
And in terms of your interaction with the units in England, which units are you involved with there?
Where, sorry?
In the United Kingdom. In
England.
On your map. Yes.
We have few hospitals. We work with the Barts Hospital in London. We recently went to do a site network visit in October with Marichelle as well. And we were supposed to go to Manchester, but Liverpool, Portsmouth, Bristol, Cardiff, all of these hospitals. So we have a large network. I think it's one of, for our bigger trials, especially in breast, they're collaborating with all the hospitals.
Okay.
The biggest hospitals in
Thank
UK.
you. Roisin.
Thanks so much. It's great to see the scope of what you're doing. Can you explain to me how MEDSIR is different to other groups that we may be more familiar with working with, like ETOP, IBCSG, or SALTI? Obviously, the sponsorship is unique to some groups, but just the difference. I haven't actually. I'm very familiar with the Fergain study, but obviously this is we're all learning now about MEDSIR. So just that maybe to just give a.
We are a profit company, so there are people that work and they're specifically working on that. So it's not a cooperative group, although it can look very similar to it. So that means that probably, in this sense, we're more direct, and it's people that are dedicated only to that. So in this sense, it's different, but we are open to also to collaboration with cooperative groups. As can be seen as a competition, but we have experience of oncologists working for both, and being, for example, the Professor Matthias Preuser is very involved in different cooperative groups in brain tumors, or we have other experience in the GI space and all of that. So, we're similar, but we have differences as well.
So if a PI or a site wishes to work with you, is it for a fee, or does the revenue come from the partnerships that you develop, or how does it work?
So when we develop a budget, we take into account also all the people that are working for the trial. So that means that can be a little bit more expensive in terms of cost that you ask into the company, but at the same time, the quality of the trial is different from a trial that is run just by an oncologist, because the oncologists have less time, and of course all the things that come up with being an oncologist and a professor and doing patient visits. So that's the difference. And when we ask for the money is because we're working on that every day, and yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
No,
Thank you.
Thank you. It's okay?
That's okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is joining us from Leeds. Dr. Hall is a principal statistician at the Clinical Trials Unit in Leeds. And earlier this year, late last year, we heard a presentation from their group about the impact of clinical trials over 2 or 3 decades on a disease course. And it was like the one slide that you would want in a presentation to follow Alan's comment about the impact of trials. If you wanted one slide to show the impact of trials on a disease and on a community, this was the slide. So we're very delighted to hear from you today.
I think I've got the same slide in my presentation, so hopefully everybody will think the same.
You got the slide memo. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you to CTI and ISMO for inviting me here to talk today. I'm a statistician, so I work on a number of different investigator-initiated studies as well as charity-funded studies. So I provide statistical and logistical oversight right from the study inception all the way to publication. So today I'm going to talk about myeloma, our myeloma portfolio, and some of the innovations in the methodology work that I've conducted. And in terms of my talk, I'm going to give a brief outline of what is myeloma, an intro to the clinical trials research unit at Leeds, and then talk really the meat of the talk around the methodological innovation in early phases 1 and 2. And this will be master protocols and dose finding designs, as well as external controls. And then I'll finish up with a few thoughts on practical implementation. So what is myeloma? So multiple myeloma is a cancer of the bone marrow and the plasma cells. So there's around 6,000 new diagnoses per year in the UK, and it accounts for 1 to 2% of all diagnoses. There isn't currently a cure, but there are significant advances in treatments over the past few decades. So the disease follows a relapsing remitting pattern whereby patients will receive frontline therapy and then unfortunately eventually relapse and then receive second and third and subsequent lines of therapy. Okay, so advances in myeloma treatment. So really before the millennia, survival outcomes for patients with myeloma were quite poor, less than 3 years median survival. And then with the advent of more targeted therapies at the turn of millennia, there are now lots of different treatment options for patients, and we can see that the survival has increased. So really kind of these questions now, as well as answering lots of new drugs that continue to come along, actually risk stratification, who are the patients that are not doing very well, and perhaps response adaptive type designs, as well as because myeloma is prevalent, I think the median age of diagnosis is around 65, actually frailty assessment in terms of how we dictate treatment. Okay, so I think this is the slide that Seamus was mentioning, and so this really kind of highlights advances in myeloma, but also kind of what the UK has added to this. So we can see at the top, so in terms of MRC4, which was incepted in kind of the 1980s before I was born, all the way to myeloma 11, which is around 2015-16, and we can see that the overall survival for patients has increased to around 10 years. So in terms of then also the number of patients that we're treating, at the start in terms of myeloma 4, we were recruiting around 500 patients, but then myeloma 11 for some time was the biggest myeloma trial in the world, certainly, and it still remains the biggest academic myeloma trial, and we recruited over 2,500 patients. So this is 9,500 patients over 36 years, and the median survival has increased from 2 to over 10 years with current therapy. So thinking about the Leeds Clinical Trials Research myeloma portfolio, so we are we're a large CTU with over 200 employees across 4 divisions. So we have a complex interventions division, surgery diagnostics division, and then also a methodology division, but the largest division is actually cancer. So we split this into an early and late phase, and then our late phase portfolio is funded. We receive infrastructure funding from Cancer Research UK. And the main portfolios that we have are radiotherapy, late phase hematology, colorectal, and then emerging kind of contains everything that doesn't fit in the other 3 categories. So our late phase hematology portfolio includes mainly the phase 3 myeloma trials, but also a number of CLL trials as well. So the early phase part, the early phase myeloma, as terms of the Concept and Access Research Programme, that's where I sit. So I sit as kind of a methodological lead for that portfolio. And really, in terms of this arrow, really means that we have a joined up thinking in terms of when we're designing our early phase trials, they really need to feed into our late phase strategy. And just to highlight the UK Myeloma Research Alliance, so this is an organisation, formerly kind of the NCRI subgroup, that really brings together UK researchers in the myeloma space to make sure that when we are pitching studies to industry, we are competitive, and that also that we can actually deliver on these studies or recruit to these studies. And just to say as well that this methodological expertise is underpinned with this infrastructure funding, and that includes kind of a PPIE and an EDI officer. Just to highlight as well that the Myeloma UK provide the infrastructure funding for the early phase programme. Okay, so just kind of the depth, I guess, or breadth of the trials currently in myeloma in the Leeds Clinical Trials unit. So we have a number of the late phase trials up at first line, and then we have a number at second and third line. But really just to highlight that today I'll be talking about the Optimum trial at first line, which is a high-risk study, and then also the Promise platform. So the Promise platform, so thinking about master protocols. So master protocols, you may have heard of platforms, umbrellas, and baskets. So we heard earlier this morning kind of the effort that goes into setting up each individual study in terms of ethics approvals, database design, regulatory approvals. And at the end of every single study, we close that down and then start again for the next research question. So master protocol design really tries to capitalize on that logistical support at the start, so it designs a big study and answers lots of similar questions, all as part of one master protocol. So this is this is the first platform trial for relapsed patients with myeloma in the UK. So really this is looking at a belamaf backbone. So belamaf is a BCMA drug conjugate. So it was a new mechanism of action. So there were lots of other compounds really that we could combine it with standard of care therapies. So this was a phase 1, phase 2 trial. So initially we're looking at a safety run-in, kind of a stop-go with a toxicity endpoint to demonstrate that we could combine these drugs with the belamaf. We then move to cohort expansion and look a little bit at the response rates to see whether it was effective. So really, one of the key features of this, which is not that typical of an early phase platform particular, is this belamaf monotherapy backbone. So when we initiated the trial, there was no evidence of earlier lines of therapy in terms of how well patients would do with belamaf at kind of the first relapse. So we introduced the belamaf monotherapy arm really to provide context in terms of so that we could understand the toxicities, kind of the synergy between some of the the standard of care therapies as well as the belamaf. So thinking a little bit about exactly what the design of that dose-finding design may be. So at the start, our question really is this drug safe to give? So is this combination, safe? So we went with a design that was similar to kind of a phase 1 dose-finding design in order to answer this question. So really, in terms of phase 1 trial design, traditionally these have been conducted prior to about 1990, using algorithm designs, 3+3 or the rolling 6 may be an example. And then a statistician got involved, I suppose, in the early 90s and kind of said that perhaps this study design isn't very effective. You're not finding the maximum tolerated dose too often, and also you're not treating that many patients in and around the MTD. So there's two types of statistical design, either a model-assisted or a model-based design that allow us to not just find an MTD with more accuracy, but then also to treat more patients at more effective doses. So this is an example, the MTPI2 that we used in PROMISE for our safety run-in. There's also other designs, model-assisted BOIN, which I think has received FDA fit for purpose. So there's lots of, and these are really pragmatic designs in that you can, in the protocol, similar to kind of the more traditional algorithmic designs, kind of look and then just add pre-specified decisions. So here we can see along the x-axis or the number of DLTs, which is a composite endpoint of quite a bad toxicity, and then across the number of evaluated patients. So we can see after initial cohort of 3 patients, for example, similar to the 3+3 design, 1 out of 3 would stay at the same dose, but if there were more toxicities in our cohort, then we'd stop. But here, rather than the 3+3, we can see that we can extend it for 3, 6, 9, and everything in between. So if we get an invaluable patient, we can make decisions with 5 patients, for example. So then, moving on from phase 1 to phase 2, and thinking about the MUC9 Optimum study. So this study came about from myeloma 11 and myeloma 9 and identifying subgroups that really didn't respond well to therapy. So from these studies, we identified a group based on genetics as well as gene expression profile in the PCL patients that were doing really poorly on the standard of care therapies or the trial therapies. So our design really was a biomarker stratified design in that we'd recruit patients to a screening protocol to start with, and then we'd identify those patients that were high risk or ultra high risk disease, and then we treat them with a more intensive therapy in order to improve their outcomes. So the key thing here when we involved patients at the design stage was that it was really unethical to be randomizing patients in this setting. So at the time, identifying whether the patients were high risk or not wasn't standard of care. So we would be both simultaneously telling the patient that they have high risk disease and that their outcomes are going to be quite poor, while at the same time saying that we're going to randomize you to a therapy that just doesn't work. So as a result, we came up with the design, given that we had historical data from myeloma 11 or external data, that we would come up with this external comparator design, whereby we would compare, I suppose, our new data from Optimum, MUC9, and then also to our historical or our external control. So for this, we used a Bayesian design, and our primary endpoint, because we knew and we wanted quite a quick readout, was progression-free survival at 18 months, compared against the prior, which I'll come on to. Because we didn't, there was very little evidence at the time of study inception as to whether these treatments worked. We had multiple futility analysis based on shorter-term MRD, as well as a 12-month PFS endpoint. So, thinking now around this prior, so it was a Bayesian design. So if we think, the statistician looks in their toolbox and thinks a single-arm trial, you'd compare against a fixed historical control rate. So what we're trying to do, I think the Simons design was mentioned earlier today, similar kind of the Ahern's design, where we try and demonstrate that the experimental arm is greater than a fixed historical control rate. But of course, there may be different standards of that historical control rate as to where it came from. So particularly because we had individual patient-level data from myeloma 11, we wanted to account for this uncertainty. So we can represent this in terms of what's called a probability density function. So here, if we look at the green curve, we know from our historical data that the PFS perhaps is somewhere around 0.5, and then if we have more information and more data, we'd have a tighter curve. So really, the height of this curve just demonstrates the degree of belief that we have about a particular parameter. So we can make probabilistic statements. So for example, with this green curve, we could say with 90% chance that the PFS rate lies in between 0.3 and 0.75. And so then our success criteria as a result is really kind of a probability rather than a p-value that the proportion of patients alive at 18 months is greater than an external control rate with a really high degree of certainty. So these are the results of the Optimum MUC9 study. I think just to say really that the study, beyond its clearly fantastic clinical results, really were recruited over a year ahead of schedule. And that was because there was a really high unmet patient need, and hospitals and sites really wanted to recruit to this study in order to get their patients on potentially a more effective therapy. So these were the two probability density curves that I mentioned. So we can see with the black dash curve, this represents our prior or the myeloma 11 data, and then the blue is the new optimum treatment, which is informed by the data. So we can see clearly in terms of our whether the treatment was effective. The blue curve, there's a lot more chance, I suppose, that the blue curve is greater than the red or black, depending on which screen you're looking on. So this, we can have another distribution, so we can see that the probability of the treatment difference that we're interested in is nearly 99.5%, so a really high chance that our therapy does work in this setting. In terms of where we're at with this study, we're now at the stage where we've got over 5 years of additional follow-up, and we can see that the blue curve, our optimum, or the Darcy VRD, is clearly superior to the myeloma 11 historical control, and we're looking at commissioning to try and get this therapy effected in the UK. Okay, so really these types of trial design are not going to replace an RCT. An RCT is clearly still going to be the gold standard. But then, by the fact that we don't have this randomization, we introduce confounding. And so this is a problem, and there was a few examples of external control trials, perhaps that weren't done to a great quality in the literature, and perhaps they got a reputation that these just don't do these. So I think here we're trying to improve on the single-arm trial design rather than replace the RCT. So this is just one fantastic paper by Folland, which was published in 2020, which is really a primer in external controls. So really there are some things that you could do that will improve your external comparator. So really we want the patients as similar in our external data as they are in their new experimental treatment. So he gave a number of different categories, I suppose, as to how good your external control would be. So thinking about data source, for example, I think we heard this morning with a case with pembrolizumab that there was over a 25% difference between real-world data versus clinical trial data. So this is important when we're thinking about an external control. So I'll move on to looking specifically at Optimum and these different categories. So thinking about the data source, we had a high-quality randomized control trial that was really rich in baseline demographics. We had a huge sample size from which to create our external data as well. So the similarity of the data sets. So we purposely designed the trial to have similar entry criteria so that we could use this data more effectively. Centralized sample for risk, so that we knew that our definitions were identical. We also analysed using the same endpoint definitions, and it was Leeds CTIU that held the data and analysed the trial. So the external control methods, we did go with a simple pooled approach, which was seen as perhaps not as favourable as something more statistical, but it does require a really high level of similarity between the data sets which we had by design. We also specified a lot of sensitivity analyses in order to demonstrate so different methods of constructing our external control were robust to conclusions. And then finally, relevance and reliability. We had high similarity between patients, same geography, same healthcare, although probably negative that there was a small immortal time bias. So because we had this screening protocol, and then those patients that were identified as high risk were then given further consent to enter our treatment protocol, there was a chance, and there was one patient that died before they were offered treatment in our treatment protocol. So this, if it was on a bigger scale, could introduce a bias as well. So finally, just a few thoughts on implementations. So master protocols, they're quite tricky to set up, particularly in the face of frequent changes to safety profiles and industry priorities. So I introduced that platform as kind of 4 or 5 different studies. Actually, the monotherapy didn't start, even though we designed the protocol, simply because there was some data elsewhere that demonstrated that monotherapy perhaps wasn't effective. When we're thinking about designing master protocol in late phase, it's really challenging with many different industry partners in the same trial, perhaps competing and demonstrating that their drugs are directly comparing. So it's thinking about that before study initiation. Thinking more about the dose finding design, it's essential that you involve a statistician where possible, and there are quite simple designs available that vastly improve upon finding an optimal dose over these algorithmic type designs. So external controls, I think up front we had the University of Leeds were the data controller for the external data, which made it quite easy. It was just a quick conversation with your colleague. But if you are going to be using data from a different source, you will need a data sharing agreement to ensure that you've got patient level access to that data. And then really some of the stuff I've talked about those 4 quality metrics, you really need to be thinking about these are essential to consider during the planning stage. So all these different aspects, your sensitivity analysis, all need pre-specifying as part of your protocol. So really to think about these up front, and a statistician should be able to help with that. But just finally around external controls, I think there are settings that these sorts of designs are needed, and just to consider them. And just thank you for listening. Is that a bit over time? Or?
Sorry?
Is that over time?
No,
thanks.
So thank you very much. We have some time for some questions. If I could, I thought your talk was an exemplar of the need, of the benefit of a statistician in a study, with some of the slides in the external controls, because we would have that also, say, in external control for patients with very poor prognosis tumours where there's no standard treatment available, or where you're trying a novel targeted therapy because you've identified an abnormality. So in that end, so it's not, it's probably a scenario that's going to become more common over time as we learn more treatment issues.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So I think there needs to be a real rationale, particularly logistically, in terms of if you get more subtypes of disease, your patient population becomes smaller and smaller. So I presented there just a single arm trial, but there are then methods as well to augment your control. So you might think about randomizing, for example, 3-to-1 experimental to control, and then you bring in some control data from your external source, but then you've also got your concurrent control, and that just alleviates some of those selection biases and some of the problems that you have with single-arm trials.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Our penultimate speaker is Professor Peter Doran from UCD. He heads the clinical trial unit there and is going to talk to us about expanding academic research in Ireland. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Seamus, and afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be here. I know we're coming towards the end of the day, so I'll try and not send anybody to sleep. I was asked to talk about academic research and expanding academic research, and I was really struck. I know Alan for a long time, and I was struck by one of the comments he made earlier, that sometimes it seems as if the system, and we'll get onto that in a moment, almost puts the academic environment, the university environment, and the healthcare environment at loggerheads. And it's a real interesting thing, because we've seemed to do that better than anywhere else in Ireland. And I'll give a very specific example of that. We're all familiar at the moment with the establishment of the health regions. If you look at the initial report that created the health regions, the universities aren't mentioned. It's like they don't exist. So the place that produces the doctors that work in the system, the nurses, the physios, and all of the others, they don't exist. They're not there. And it's an interesting thing, isn't it, just to think about that. And actually, it's really nice then in that context to follow Andrew, because if I had to say of anything that we should do to expand academic activity and influence, it's collaborate. We need to work with lots of different type of people, and that's what the academic environment gives us to do. So my day job, I'm Professor of Clinical Trials, and I'm Director of the UCD Clinical Research Centre. My second meeting this morning was with a colleague from the School of Archaeology in UCD. What am I meeting an archaeologist about, you might add? Well, actually, he's preparing an ERC application at the moment, and his ERC application is going to focus on some really, really interesting things about dentition in skeletal remains, very ancient skeletal remains. But actually, as it turns out, we have some really interesting biomarkers that are hugely useful for the type of work he's proposing. So be open to collaboration with lots of different people. And in clinical trials, I think that's even more so. My last meeting yesterday evening was with colleagues from the School of Maths. We're putting a research application together at the moment, a funding application, for a piece of work on some of new methodologies that Andrew would be quite familiar with. And again, telling us that if we want to do better trials, we have to collaborate. It's not a case of either the healthcare professionals or the healthcare system working on its own. We have to be collaborative. And we have to do that because clinical trials are important. And I'm not going to re-emphasize the importance of clinical trials, but sometimes scale reflects importance. Clinical trials are I have two different screens, so that's okay. Clinical trials it's a $65 billion market with a compounded annual growth rate for out to 2030 of 5 to 7%. So these are not going away. They're growing. They're becoming more and more important. However, there's lots of challenges ahead. North America currently accounts for about 40% of all clinical trials. There's about 150 countries and 80,000 sites with 3 million employees. So this is a significant driver of economic activity as well. Hence, it's unsurprising that there is so much focus on this. This always blows my mind. There are 450,000 trials registered globally. 450,000. I mean, it's just extraordinary numbers. Now, that says registered. Lots of those are probably finished, but nonetheless, they're there. Oncology, which won't surprise anyone in this room, accounts for the largest portion of clinical trials at 35%, and the US is the biggest site. But there we have to pause. Biomedical and clinical research globally is at a time of great threat. For the last 40 years, the vast majority of advancements came from US-funded research. The NIH-funded programs drove about 35% of the top scientific output globally. So if you do analysis of the 50 and above impact factor journals, 35% of those were funded by the US federal government. That's changed over the last 15 years anyway, where there's been an increase in funding. For example, China is now funding research at a greater scale than the US is. But that's changing even more right now. Anyone who's on an NIH, I chair an NIH panel, and I got an email on Sunday morning telling me the panel is not going to do any more work for the foreseeable future, given the presidential executive order that's cutting the funding to the NIH. I'm on an FDA group that is looking at biomarkers of safety. It's called the Safety Consortium, and we got an email from the FDA last Friday evening saying all the work on this is stopping. So there is a significant time of threat. That time of threat also means there's an opportunity for us here in Ireland, which I'll talk about in a while. Now, I want to specifically talk about academic trials. When we classify trials, we can do it by phase, regulated, non-regulated, intervention type, all of that. I'm really interested in academic trials, in investigator-led trials. We also have a significant support for industry-led trials, but other colleagues address that as part of their comments. So I'm going to talk about academic trials. And academic trials are really, really important. because more than anything else, they help us to address unmet clinical needs. We've just completed and published in The Lancet a clinical trial that was looking at prophylactic oral surfactant in the minutes after delivery of preterm babies. Effectively saying, do you wait or do you give surfactant prophylactically? It's a 45-cent shot of surfactant up the nose. It's a one-time deal. It's of no commercial value to anybody. But for the neonatologist, it's a pretty important question. Equipoise existed. Nobody knew what the best approach was. And I would argue that in the absence of a focus on academic clinical trials, studies like that address important needs that overcome equipoise would never be done. They also allow us to build capacity and to develop our investigators. And I was very struck by Alan's comments around that earlier. We have to think about developing our investigator capacity as an active process. It's no longer good enough to say, well, people will go away to the US and they'll do some stuff and then they'll come back and it'll all be wonderful. We have to think about that much, much better. There's a lot more work to do on that. But clinical trials are difficult. They cost a lot of money, they take a lot of time, it can be difficult to recruit and retain patients. So we've lots of challenges with clinical trials, and I would argue that those challenges are even more acute for investigator or academic-led clinical trials. So what do? Do we just say, well, those academic-led trials are too difficult, so we're not going to do those, we'll do something different? Or do we go and collaborate and work with other colleagues? And Andrew showed, I think, a very elegant example of, for example, using external controls as a way to technologically and methodologically advance. Rather than saying, oh, we can't do that anymore, it's too hard, we advance. And when I think about this in the context of expanding academic activity, I think about overcoming these challenges with different designs. And we've already heard about innovative approaches to trial design, and there's a lot of really interesting work happening in that space. We think a lot about technology. So in my unit, we do a lot of work on technology to enable designs, including using technology to secure some of this data that we're now sending around the place all the time. So we use blockchain to secure data. And also how do we engage, how do we improve patient engagement? So that, to use technology to do some of that. In terms of designs, we've heard about master protocols already and biomarker trials. There's also some really interesting things like decentralized trials. One of the things I worry about an awful lot is I don't think that access to academic medicine I don't think we think about access. And what that means then is that depending on where you live and the catchment area, it will decide whether you get access to clinical trials or not. We're really interested in trying to break that down. So whilst the UCD Clinical Research Centre is primarily active at the Mater and St. Vincent's hospitals, we also have activity at Wexford General Hospital, at St. Luke's in Kilkenny, and we have a general practice network. And we do that because we want to run trials in a decentralised way that makes sure that Irish people, regardless of where they live, get access to trials as part of their routine care. As I mentioned, we do a lot of work on technology in trials. We do a lot with digital tools and wearables. For example, we have a really nice piece of work that's ongoing where we're giving patients with pulmonary fibrosis Apple Watches and iPhones, and we're letting them go off about their business. And we're then building clinical prediction models on the basis of some of the data that we derive from that. For a disease where the functional decline is largely linked to biometric endpoints that are really easily measured using an Apple Watch, it makes an awful lot of sense to do that. We work a lot with our colleagues, as I mentioned. The biggest grant that I'm going to work on this year will have 3 people from the clinical and biomedical background and 11 from data science. The applicant team looks pretty skewed, but actually will probably be the best bit of work we'll do. That'll include quite a piece of work on AI and machine learning and how we use that to reanalyze data sets. So we're very interested in reanalysis. We're already deploying blockchain. I really liked that system earlier about referring patients to trials. I just thought that was just really, really wonderful, and it was great to see it. We can use technology to address some of the concerns, because people have concerns about, what about my data? We can use blockchain to do that. And then, of course, we're very focused on regulatory technology. And then in engagement, this is the bit that sometimes we don't do right, but this is the opportunity that we have to be better at making sure that we bring patients with us in this journey as we grow our clinical trial activity. We're really, really interested in the idea of patient-centered trial designs. We have an investigator-led trial ongoing at the moment, and it's looking at, it's ongoing about 4 years, and we're nearly there. It's looking at semaglutide in HIV-positive patients, from so primarily African HIV-positive patients who are obese and we're treating with semaglutide. A really tough population to get to enroll in trials because there's a whole series of barriers there. One of the best pieces of work we did was we got HIV Ireland to design the protocol with us. And it was a really, really interesting approach to how we do that and how we make sure that the trial design is appropriate. And I guess part of the thinking around this then comes to this idea that one of the things that we have to do is we have to make sure that as we're thinking about trial designs, that we're focusing on designs that are sensible for the population and that will capture, for example, if it's a rare cancer, perhaps we're thinking about data-driven N of 1 trials for rare diseases. If they're underrepresented populations, how do we get them in? How do we create those platforms where we have more and more patients are able to access the trials on an ongoing basis? And then things like cluster trials for complex phenotypes. And one of the things we've tried to do is really embed in our design thinking this idea that if we can't tie a line from the trial design to some kind of a demonstrable impact on the patient over and above the clinical impact. We're supposed to be measuring clinical endpoints, folks. There's nothing innovative in that. If we can't in some way link it to an impact on patients, their families, or wider society, it's probably not the trial for us, and we'll engage with something else. We do all of that through the UCD Clinical Research Centre, which I've already mentioned. I'm delighted to be the director of. We've got a team of about 60 people in the centre who work across all areas of our activity. We support academic studies in particular from every stage. And this has been kind of a labour of love in many ways over the last number of years, in that because the ability to access funding, which I will make a comment on in a moment, is really, really challenging, and it's skewed, and it's really, really positively skewed towards some individuals and excludes others. We work very closely with investigators right from the start of writing their grants. And I was struck by the earlier presentation and the question of what do you do when you can't get the money from industry. Well, I think the answer is we try and get it from somewhere else, which again I'll talk to. So one of the things we've tried to do is we've tried to support things across all of this. We're a reasonably kind of busy centre in the 21 to 24 period. We've had about 490 total studies. And 64% of those have been academic-led, which again I think reflects the decisions that we've made within UCD about where our particular priorities sit. We like to think about impact. So we're a university. And here's one of the tips for the trainees. When you're talking to people in universities, you have to talk to them about things that they really, really care about. And the things that they care about are things like impact, its publications, and metrics. Now, this is the bit that, every year when the university rankings come out, everybody says, well, we don't really look at university rankings. We do. When the funding agencies say they don't look at your funding track record, your field-weighted citation index or your H-index, we do, because you have to. Our field-weighted citation index is 3.15. To give you a perspective on that, UCD's is 1.82, and we account for about 19% of the citations of UCD. That's of UCD in total. 19% come from clinical research. We've recently built a CTU, and I won't go through this in too much detail, but one of the things we recognize is that our investigator-initiated trial program could do with additional structure and support. So we created a CTU last summer and launched it. And I must, at this point, mention that it's another example of the importance of collaboration, because the support we've got from UK colleagues in particular around the establishment of this has been really significant. Andrew, as you were talking, Sarah Brown emailed me about a conversation that we're having about kind of working together in the CTU. So there's fantastic support from colleagues in the UK in particular who are so far down the road in terms of CTUs versus what we are here. I want to talk about kind of expanding capacity, because this is the bit where I suppose the rubber hits the road. How do we do that? How do we enable a group like this? And I'm very conscious that the purpose of today is to provide an opportunity for the leaders of the future to perhaps learn, to share their experience. And I guess what we have to think about is we have to think about what are our trial leaders, who are going to be the people who will lead these investigator-initiated trials in the future, and how are we going to develop those? But more importantly, how are we going to support them? How are we going to make it stick? We have to think about funding. I should have mentioned at the start, I am a member of the board of the Health Research Board. And it's an interesting place to be because it gives an opportunity to, well, firstly, try and shape what the HRB might do in the future, but also gives us a real sense of how they make decisions and how they think about things, and is that aligned to what the community needs? And that's it's sometimes not and needs a bit of work. And we need to develop capacity. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to develop capacity, and we need to be bold for a vision for clinical research for Ireland, given the way things are changing. And we have some things going for us. Ireland, as you know, is a global hub for tech giants. 7 of the world's top 10 are headquartered, or at least for now, headquarters in Ireland. We have a thriving life sciences sector, and that creates a unique environment, I think, for research and innovation. We're one of those large grants we mentioned at the moment that I'm working on with our data analytics colleagues has 3 tech giants as well as 2 really big pharma companies as co-applicants on the same grant. It's a really, really interesting thing. And I think that intersection of AI, hardware, software, and cloud expertise that's in the Irish ICT sector is something that we need to leverage and we need to do more with. The solutions in terms of managing large populations of patient data and clinical decision support and digital therapeutics and all of those, they sit here already in that sector. We also have a really significant clinical research sector in Ireland from an industry perspective. ICON, which is now the largest CRO in the world, is an Irish company. It's headquartered in Leopardstown, and it has significant activity globally. But others like Parexel and Acuvia and Covance and Venn all have presence here in Ireland. And we need to work better with those to be able to really leverage the power of collaboration. There's some green shoots. In my opening comments about biomedical and clinical research facing tough challenges, let me also end on a more optimistic note. In Ireland, we do have a well-established regulatory framework. When we put in an application to the HPRA and NREC, we ultimately know what's going to happen. It's pretty predictable. That's not to say it's perfect, but it's predictable and well developed. We're well positioned in terms of international collaborations. Every PI in this room will have a network of collaborators globally that gives us an opportunity to do more. We have great clinical trial sites. Through particularly the HRB's investment in Cancer Trials Ireland, in the cancer clusters, and then in the CRCs and CRFs, we do have good infrastructure. It needs to be built on. It needs to be expanded. But we have a strong base. We have somewhere that we can start. Significant consortia and clinical trial networks have been funded over the last number of years as well, and they also give us an opportunity to do more. So I think overall we're well positioned. And my call to all of you trainees, all of those at the start of their careers, is that you need to think really, really carefully about how you're going to make sure that the ecosystem that has been developed, that's reasonably well positioned, can grow and can continue to deliver for patients and their families. And I would appeal to you as you go forward in your career with that. And indeed, if you talk to your successful mentors, I bet they will all tell you the same. Your ability to develop multidisciplinary collaborations will probably be the bit that will distinguish you from an academic perspective. By being able to work with colleagues, whether they're from other clinical disciplines or completely unrelated disciplines, and think of me and the archaeologists, you will get to a point where your ability to be able to solve the complex problems of the world will only continue to be increased. The other thing I would say is that everybody needs to get themselves involved, at least in some capacity, in a policy perspective. Don't assume that things will never change. Don't assume that that grant funding scheme that you're planning on applying to in 5 years' time, don't assume it'll still be there. Make your voice heard. Make sure that people know what you think is important. And if you need something different, make sure that's done as well. The disaster, as we see now in the US, as if policy around biomedical research in the US is going to be set by people who don't know anything about biomedical research. So make sure you use your voice. Do get involved. So let me close by saying we do need a new strategic vision for clinical and translational research. We need an ambition in Ireland to contribute globally. It's not good enough that we just do our bit. The most important thing you will do in that is have, as you contribute to that, is have that ability to work with others. It's through that we'll truly expand academic activity. It's through that we'll truly have an impact on patients. And it's over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. That was excellent. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts?
And in the spirit, as I said, of engaging, if anybody wants to drop me an email or give me a ring, please do. We're always happy to talk to colleagues, regardless of where you're from or what you're interested in, as mentioned, archaeologists and all.
Thank you very much.
Not at all. Thanks, Seamus.
So our final talk today is related to what our ambitions for Cancer Trials Ireland and our young investigators. So if I could. So this is a joint presentation by myself and Gerry Hanna. Gerry Hanna was appointed Professor of Radiotherapy, the Marie Curie Chair in Radiotherapy in Trinity last year, and has taken up the Vice Clinical Lead in Cancer Trials Ireland at the beginning of the year. His inaugural lecture was yesterday in Trinity, and it really showed how Trinity were very fortunate to have recruited someone of his stature and his CV and ability, and how very fortunate we are at Cancer Trials Ireland that he's decided to take up the Vice Clinical Lead role, which marks the beginning of an 8-year commitment by him to the organisation. I think his appointment will be transformational for the organisation, and we're delighted that he's accepted the role. So why is succession important? So succession, as Peter was saying about the next generation, is what happens next and building on what is happening today. In my time, succession was a pipeline. You went to medical school, you left it, went on a training program, became a consultant, and everything started. But today, things are different. People may have started a different career before they went into medicine. They may have had gaps during their medical career for personal reasons or for carers reasons or because they wanted a break. And they may have rejoined the stream. So it's much more diverse. Diversity is a good thing, but to harness that diversity, we need to be flexible in terms of what we do, in terms of encouraging people at different stages in their career. And there are times when people leave the research career and rejoin it for other reasons. It's very hard to do research when you're only one of 2 consultants in a department, when there should be at least 5 or 6 times that number. And so in your careers, your time in and out of research will change and evolve. And it's important that we remain engaged with you in all stages of your career so that you can continue to contribute. I thought one of the telling comments at this morning session related to when to get involved in research, and it seemed to me from Declan Devan's presentation, it's never too early to start. But one of the issues in cancer medicine is the challenges of being someone who works in cancer, because we're exposed to a chronic emotional labour of dealing with patients at the most challenging times of their lives. So in trying to ensure succession, we must also be cognizant of how difficult it is to do the clinical jobs in our lives. This is from Blue Sky, from a brain tumour support group in New Zealand. And I think it really emphasises the journey of patients when they start off with everything as plain sailing, and then it catastrophizes, and you're finally left with the hope that things will be better in the future. I think the infogram in the centre here is really telling of the challenges of cancer for many of the people we treat. Gerry sent this slide to me yesterday. It's the review of burnout in the oncology workforce in the United States. So there's a couple of things to show here. They looked at a 10-year period. So 10 years ago, we were looking at a 45% rate. Now it's gone up to 59%. The rate actually among fellows and doctors in training has actually fallen from 30% down to 20%, reflecting the fact that the training programs have probably adapted or improved and recognized this as an issue. Some of my trainees have pointed to this figure here to say that the reason it's gone up is the challenges of dealing with things in the clinical workforce. It's higher in the younger age groups, and that may reflect the fact that they've left clinical medicine by the time to get to this. So it's a bit like the Will Rogers phenomenon, where you reduce the average, where if I move out of the room, I reduce the average age in the room. For Cancer Trials Ireland, this is the slide that's our problem. So it's been discussed before. So our time to first patient time in Ireland is among the lowest in Europe. This is data looking at 35 different trials from a clinical research organisation that was generous enough to provide it. And this is their internal data. So you can see it's very dramatic where we are. Being an outlier is never good here. So I guess the issue is, if this is a problem, what are we doing about it? So our last board strategy was held in January of last year. The next one is next week. And at the board strategy day in 2024, the board decided reducing operational friction in the organisation to speed the processing of information and contracts, etc., was going to be the most important aspect of what we did. Looking for more funding resources, as was described earlier, academic funding resources have declined. in clinical research, and increasing clinical engagement and listening to the clinicians to see how we could do things better. As clinical lead, these were my priorities: streamlining processes to make the time to first patient shorter, increasing the number of studies in our portfolio for patients in our community, ensuring succession within the organisation, and sustainability from an environmental point of view. So this is what we've been doing in the past year. So the first thing is that we've made young investigator engagement a priority both at board level and at clinical lead level. This is the second national training day. We've had cancer retreats for the last 4 years in addition. We're collaborating with Professor Michaela Higgins in ISMO in an onboarding document that will be available to young investigators and newly appointed consultants, and we're also looking at integrating the radiation oncology community into this onboarding document also. We started collaboration meetings post-ASCO, educational meetings, and we've been doing these virtually for the last 3 years to integrate Cancer Trials Ireland into the medical oncology ecosystem. And we've looked at inclusion and integration of trainees in our DSSGs and in our trials. We just finished the first patient-led study in oncology in Ireland, led by Siobhan Gaynor. There were 2 trainees on the steering committee for the study. They were both first authors. Both had first author presentations at ESMO Breast, and another paper has been submitted for publication where the first author is also an SPR. So as part of that process, the SPRs have benefited from hearing the patient voice and from learning at a very early stage how beneficial it is to have PPI integration into the project. That has trickled down into presentations done this morning by our group, where PPI involvement was sought and integrated into those presentations. We're also looking at webinars, which we've had trainees involved in and are submitting publications regarding that. And there's also been collaborative initiatives with the Breast International Group and National Cancer Trials Network. Jerushka and Roshin and others have also integrated through ETOP and EORTC young investigator programs. This is important because the networks that Peter talked about in his trial can start at any stage, but these collaborations mean that they start early. It means that our young trainees are co-authoring papers with senior figures in the field, not just in Ireland, but globally, and that spills out into contacts and networks elsewhere. The HRB Clinical Trials Office were involved today in a presentation in looking at seeking collaboration and outlining where they could advise us, and also in terms of their advice on social media. And we're looking at something I'm going to discuss in the next slide of mentoring and collaboration with clinical trial groups overseas at international meetings. We've put in returning investigator presentations to promote what networks people have established, and also to announce their presence in the clinical stage for collaborations and networks that will develop as a result of that. And we've integrated a CTI Lunch and Learn, where young investigators and seasoned investigators come and talk to the staff in head office, so that we're making head office nearer the sites and vice versa. We're hoping to look at other issues such as a nursing and allied health lead, analogous to a clinical lead. There's a tremendous need for leadership and mentoring of our allied health colleagues, of our nursing colleagues. And this role, which would have buyout time, would have a very focused protocol and document in terms of a work plan, would be something that should be included in the next HRB grant from us to expand this area further and to develop a pool of leadership in the nursing and allied health community. We want to expand our links with radiotherapy, haematology, and nursing and allied health colleagues, and we're looking at integrating those into the meeting today, similar to the collaboration that's been made with ISMO. And we're also looking at a young investigator board member group as part of this succession planning at board level. And also young investigator placements and projects with Cancer Trials Ireland. So one of our medical students is starting a project with looking at the Taormina trial, which was developed in Sweden and is being led by Fran Duan in Ireland, where she will look at carbon mapping the trial. The group in Sweden are interested in this. We're interested in sustainability here. The student is visiting the principal investigator in Gothenburg next week. So these are tremendous opportunities and something that we would like to develop and continue in the coming years. When we go to ESMO and ASCO now, we set up meetings with companies. This is a smorgasbord of the companies and groups that we met last year. As some of these young investigators and newly appointed consultants join CTI staff to establish these collaborations and these links, we've already seen significant benefit from previous investigators going and establishing contacts. For instance, my predecessor Ray McDermott with ANZUP, which has brought significant clinical trials. Multiple members of our community which have interacted with the Breast International Group, and yesterday in JAMA, Professor Michaela Higgins represented Cancer Trials Ireland on the publication of the Impassion trial, which is conducted as an adjuvant immunotherapy in breast cancer care in Ireland. So what we want is that newly appointed consultants see that they have a home in this ecosystem and that they can build and establish relationships that will then become the next ANZUP, the next Breast Cancer Trials Australia in our group. So we will be reaching out to you to see who would want to join us at these meetings at ASCO and ESMO this year. We're trying to extend our footprint in terms of young investigator involvement in other spheres. So this was the Breast International Group National Cancer Trial Network virtual meeting was held in last month, and this was the 20th anniversary of the collaboration. And as part of this meeting, we had a young investigator session where there was a panel of senior figures in breast cancer medicine who addressed queries from a young investigator group which were held globally. 40 young investigators were involved in the meeting. 6 of those young investigators from Ireland, the highest proportion globally. The guest lecture was by Drew Wiseman, who won the Nobel Prize for the mRNA vaccine in 2023. It was an eye-opening presentation, and it was really beneficial. And the plan now is a manuscript from the young investigator session, which will be a roadmap for people starting a career, an academic career in this area, where they can have a go-to resource for what the challenges are, but also what the solutions are, which could be exported to other cancer types. In radiation oncology, ATRON has been developed, an All-Ireland Translation Radiation Oncology Network, and this is built on a lot of the studies that have been developed in Belfast during Professor Hanna's time there, and subsequently have spilled over into other areas where he's worked. And you can see here that there are 3 themes that they're going to look at in this, of combining radiation oncology and various targeted therapies and looking at their interactions. And this is the roadmap for how this group will function. So I think it's a tremendously exciting thing. And as you can see, that as a medical oncologist, there's plenty of overlap here and areas of interest here which could be beneficial to both communities. We talked about time to first patient, and our priority as a board is to reduce the time to first patient. The National Clinical Trials Oversight Group, which Peter and I sit on, has been established in 2024 by the Department of Health because of the acknowledgement that we have a problem here. I'm heartened by the fact that the Minister for Health is going to join the meeting next when we meet next in February, and that clinical trials are in the programme for government in the current new government. So in CTI initiatives, we've set up a startup unit in head office to streamline our processes and to allow for more transparency with it. We have membership of NREC and the National Clinical Trials Oversight Group, and we have a lean management project which staff have taken and been certified in, looking at lean management projects and the trials that they're involved in to try and streamline our processes. We formulated a GDPR position paper and launched that. The recording was very powerful. Evelyn spoke initially at it, and then immediately transferred to a patient who described going on a clinical trial and the struggles of getting onto a clinical trial because of delays with paperwork and data protection issues, and outlined that of a cohort of 3 patients who attempted to get on the clinical trial, he was the only one that had got on and the other 2 were dead. And it really showed that bureaucracy has a body count, and that this is not an abstract thing for our patients. The GDPR position paper shows the number of trials that patients that could have been on a trial but aren't on a trial because of our delay in this area. We have an advocacy and election manifesto, and we've also established global networking organisations like MEDSIR and other and SALTI and HACAM at meetings to see what they're doing in their countries, so we can bring that knowledge back and look at how we do things better. This statue is called The Unknown Bureaucrat. It's in Iceland. So what happens next? Where we continue our focus with the time to first patient, which is probably the most important key performance indicator in the organisation, with networking, with building with partners. We want to promote trials without drugs like we have done today and also did at the cancer retreat, because they're very important to patients and to improving cancer care. And we want to develop more opportunities for young investigators, and that's what today is about. And building that. And we also want to listen to feedback from our community, which is ye and others, as regards how we could work better and how we could engage better. And we want to look at expanding funding streams, which is central to allowing us to continue our mission. So that is my final slide, and I just want to thank you very much for being here today. I'd also like to thank all those involved in organising this meeting today, and our speakers from this afternoon session who travelled today and from whose insights we have benefited greatly from. So thank you very much.
Final small issue is the announcement of the winners of the ISMO CTI bursary awards. We had some great presentations this morning. We have awards in the oral presentation section and in the poster presentation. I'm aware that several people who may have been awarded a prize have had to take the train or bus home back to their jobs and to their lives. So thank you to those that stayed. And perhaps someone who's in a hospital with someone else who won a prize might bring them their certificate, and the little checks will follow probably next week. We're not talking mortgage down payments, but perhaps a nice meal out. So in the poster presentation, I'm delighted to say that the awards are going to go to Ruth Kieran and Rachel Dillon. If you're here, come down and get your certificate. And for the oral presentations this morning, oh, there's great. Congratulations. And then for the oral presentations, we have 4 prizes, the top 4 presentations as voted by everybody. Who are we missing? No, nobody. So the top 4 that came out with the top marks for everybody are Ruth Hutch, Gavin Dowling, Clara Forrest and Shauna Moore-Davis. Congratulations. Anybody here? Yeah, with Shauna. Great, Shauna, Clara. 3 girls. worth being nervous. It worked out. Well done. Congratulations. Other way around. Congrats. That's wonderful.
Gerry, thank you very much for joining us. I think the anxiety about the prizes spilled over into the speaker. That's me, and I completely forgot that you were going to join us at the very end. So apologies. So I don't know if you have any comments to add to what's been said, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Seamus. No, you endorsed everything you said, and you really covered it very well, and wish everybody all the best, and hope to catch up the trainees hopefully over the coming year in person at some point.
Thank you very much. So finally, I'd just like to thank our audiovisual coordinators today. I'd like to thank Ken and Claire from CTI for the coordination for the audiovisuals and all of the documents and the expert publications we've received today. And on behalf of my co-chair, Professor Michaela Higgins, I'd like to thank all of the presenters for the significant work that went into today's presentations at the end of very long working days, and and weekends of not on call. And we are very grateful for you taking the time to put this together. It's a hugely important part of our work and what we do, and of the delivery of patient care in Ireland and improving patient care in Ireland. So we thank you for your dedication. It was wonderful to see so many new faces here today. It was wonderful to see so many interesting projects and work that's been done. I think that I know I speak for myself and my consultant colleagues that we are very fortunate that people of your calibre are interested in being involved in cancer care in our communities. So thank you very much for being here today. I hope you and your families have a lovely weekend.